Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry P. Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. Also at the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, check out the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, The Larry P. Arnn Show, and more, all at podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That music means the Hillsdale Dialogue is back, the last radio hour of the week. We are in The Republic by Plato. This is our 11th episode on it because it is one of the most important books ever written. And Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, is with us today, as well as Professor Daniel O'Toole. We've got to get Dr. Arnn to look up at the camera occasionally. There's Professor O'Toole. Professor O'Toole, my first question is to you. Why is Socrates always trying to leave? In Book 5, he's doing it again. He's trying to get up and go, and they're not letting. Why is he trying to get away from this?
Well, it's all kind of an act, Hugh. I think he's feigning, pretending like the conversation is done. But he's, of course, inspired these young men to believe that they are discovering a blueprint for the perfectly just society. And so they're excited. They want to hear more. They want to hear the details. And he's like, oh, sorry, I got to get home, you know.
So, Dr. Arnn, do you agree it's just theater?
Yeah, of course. He's it's not just the students, it is we, right? He is, Plato, the author here, is making this, he's explaining that this is terribly important and you should want it. And so, and also, you know, the fundamental fact about what's wrong with education in America today, by the way, is that we forget that learning is in the student. And so Plato is telling us we should act like these boys here. We should try to know, and we should urge the teacher to tell us.
Well, then the teacher should also say what Socrates says, to present arguments at a time when one is in doubt and seeking, which is just what I'm doing, Socrates says, is a thing both frightening and slippery. Do you ever have that feeling, Dr. O'Toole, when you're teaching this book, frightening and slippery?
Always. I mean, the concepts are hard to grasp, and they're dangerous, abstract, but when you really understand their importance, you see how they reveal something fundamental about our souls and about what moves us and drives us in political life. Yeah, I really, I guess returning to Book 5 today, I really like this, the transition here, because what happens is these intelligent students have picked up on a small detail that Socrates had just sort of tossed off. Oh, by the way, in this city, we need, you know, things among friends are in common, including women and children, as if that's a small thing. And Polemarchus, the highly intelligent, but for the most part, quiet interlocutor in the dialogue says, wait a minute, what do you mean by that? and
this is where I have to give the audience a rare R-rated warning, because Book 5 of The Republic is not for the faint of heart nor the easily shocked. Dr. Arnn, do you think that's appropriate just to warn people we're going to talk about all things in common and no one with any clothes on?
Yeah, well, and it's significant. That's right. We're about to get a little risque here.
Yes, we are.
It's significant that Polemarchus, who forces the conversation at the outset of the Republic, right, he more or less arrests Socrates and says, come with me. You're going back to Athens? No, turn around. You're coming down with me. And his name means warlord, right? Polemos is war and Archos is ruler, right? So that's what it means. And so here, and we're, in the middle of the book, he does it again. Hold on, Socrates.
Yeah.
It's an order again. Can't go on from here. Glaucon has done that in Book 1, too. Beginning of Book 2, I forget now. But one of the things happening in the Republic is that Socrates is being compelled.
Yeah.
And who's compelling him? His students and the nature of the argument. They both lead somewhere. It's emphatic in the Republic that these things are not an expression of will. Socrates is not contriving a world. He's trying to do that, but the world keeps getting in the way.
So Dr. O'Toole, would you give people a summary about how radical Book 5 is? Because this is really off the maps. And when I say R-rated, it is R-rated.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, what happens in Book 5 is they seriously explore what would be necessary to bring the perfectly just city into being. And when you think that through, that requires three massive reforms that Socrates sketches for the interlocutors. And the first is not, at least at first blush, terribly radical, but it's allowing for the equality of the sexes. That is, you can judge women and not just men meritocratically. And that means in your leadership class, in the guardian class, women can be members as well, if they have the nature, if they're fit for it, if they're smart enough, if they can be good warriors. So you're going to bring in at least some women into the guardian class. And that includes, and we'll talk about this, those women will be exercising with the men, participating in the naked exercises along with the other members of the guardian class. Well, that prepares the real radical wave, which is the second wave. And in the second wave, what they propose is that if you're going to make the guardian class fully committed to the city, what you need is to make the guardians view the city as their family. And that means you're going to have to eliminate effectively the private family, and you're going to have to control the process of breeding. And so there's a eugenics program. There's a very elaborate system of breeding and a system for setting up who can mate with whom so that you can raise children, the best children possible, and so that there are no private families in the ruling class. And that's the second wave. And then finally, what's presented as the most radical, I think the second wave is the most radical, but what's presented as the truly radical wave is the third wave, which is the culmination of the project of the Republic. And that is that you're going to have the city ruled by philosophers. Philosopher kings are going to be the highest class within the guardian class ruling within the city.
So people will have heard the philosopher king theory before. Most people who listen to the Hillsdale Dialogue will have heard that before. But they're not going to, it will come as a reminder or a surprise or a what? That everybody's got everybody in common. And Dr. Arnn, the festivals sound like orgies to me. We're going to have festivals of procreation. And I don't know how you end up forbidding incest, which he does do, but at the same time, anonymity of children. Do you?
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, we can get into the details of the second wave, but effectively, it seems there will be incest, at least potentially among brothers and sisters. Yeah, even though they're officially trying to forbid it among members of the older generations and younger generations.
So let me ask Dr. Arnn this question. If Plato dropped this book, or if any of our most radical feminists or our transgendered activists, and that's a Venn diagram and it doesn't always overlap, would they be happy or upset with Plato Book 5? Because he is radically egalitarian, but he's also all about having children of the best, for the best, by the best, which is nothing of a part of America. That's just not part of what we do.
Well, those people are unqualified to read this book. And the reason is it's written for people like this. The things in this book are disturbances of everything we know about nature, right? We know nature, that comes from the Latin word that means to be born and grow, right? And so nature is, we have children and we love them and we raise them. And it takes 20 years or more, and they're the most important things in our lives. And yet we are the only beings that have discretion over that process. We don't have to do it.
And we should want to do it, and we do it, and we love doing it. That's, in fact, part of what we're doing with the Hillsdale Dialogue, making you better people to raise your children better by knowing some of the first things, the most important things. Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, Dr. Daniel O'Toole, professor at Hillsdale College, will be back in just a moment as we continue our series in Plato's Republic. Don't go anywhere, except you can go over to HughHewitt.com, of course, catch up on yesterday's conversation with former President Trump, or you can come right back here on The Hugh Hewitt Show. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt here. The Hillsdale Dialogue underway. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. What you need to do right now is go over to hillsdale.edu and find out all the previous conversations we've had in our series on Plato's Republic. Dr. Arnn, we were talking about the raising of young people when we went to break. I
like to say to 19-year-olds, I'm the world's leading expert at talking to 19-year-olds about sex. And I always say, if I call your house and announce my name, I will say everything's okay with you early in the conversation, so the parents don't panic. But if you were dogs or cats or parrots, your parents wouldn't know who you are at this stage, right? And so we're devoted to the family, but we don't have to be. And unless you start understanding that, you can't understand how radical this is. And you can't understand the nature of the breakdown that comes later, because in the end, it doesn't work. Right?
It doesn't work. And let's go to the end there to go back to Dr. O'Toole. Is he serious? What's he doing by being so radical?
I mean, it's obviously playful, but there's always a serious point. And I think one of the challenges of this book, the book as a whole, but especially book 5, is seeing what the argument is and why there's something reasonable, something in us that wants these reforms, and yet why, in a sense, they also cut too much against the grain of our nature. So the official question is, are these reforms both possible and desirable? Would we ultimately want this or not? And to ask the question if it's possible, in a sense, is asking whether whether it cuts against the grain or not, or whether we would ultimately rebel against them. So if you take the first wave, there's a powerful argument for it. I mean, what the first wave does is it eliminates the traditional patriarchy, right? With the reasonable point that some women are just as capable as men. I mean, potentially in war fighting, I mean, maybe very few in combat, but some, but also in roles of leadership and certainly in intellectual capacity. And so part of the argument is, look, it's unfair to deprive capable women of this. And in fact, it's bad for the city not to get capable women in positions of leadership to have that power and authority. So in some sense, if you want to have a truly just and meritocratic arrangement, you shouldn't deprive women of that opportunity. So in some sense, it's more reasonable, okay? But on the other hand, what it requires is the women training like warriors with the men, because remember, the guardian elite are warriors, And what that means is that they're going to be doing the exercises, including the naked exercises. And Socrates says, don't laugh. This is reasonable. Don't think this is shameful. It's merely shameful in a conventional sense. In a natural sense, in a reasonable sense, it's not shameful because it's actually beneficial for the city. And what Socrates is doing, I think, is partly not just trying to bring women into positions of leadership, but partly preparing the more radical ground for the second wave. So if you think about it, if you have women working together closely with men, exercising with men, well, what's the consequence of that? It weakens the family. It weakens the traditional authority that the male has over the family. You could say men and women working together, especially exercising together, creates dangerous sexual potential, possibilities. It also somehow, though, kind of desexualizes or makes sex less romantic, right? I mean, think about this. Seeing men and women naked all the time isn't exactly appealing. And so in some sense, it creates more sexual opportunity, but less romance in the regime. And I would just say as a passing comment, I think that that's in some sense been the consequence of feminism in the modern Western world. Easier sex, easier opportunity for sex with whomever you'd like, but less serious romance and less solid family. So in the same sense that Socrates' waves of political reform lead to the abolition of the family, we can map this on nicely to the way in which feminism has its waves. And feminism, which at first seeks greater opportunities for women.
Hold right there. We're going to come back and talk about feminism with Dr. O'Toole, who you just heard. Dr. Larry Arnn in the studio as well. We're talking on the Hillsdale Dialogue. All things Hillsdale, hillsdale.edu. All prior dialogues in this series, which is now on number 11, can be found at hughforhillsdale.com. Come right back. Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt, the Hillsdale Dialogue underway with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College. Daniel O'Toole is a professor at Hillsdale College. When I broke in there to go to break, Professor O'Toole was talking about women in combat. Plato, 2,500 years ago, is anticipating the most radical feminist argument. Women in combat.
Yeah, and just
so
the basic
I want to interject a word about friendship here. One of the most beautiful and most appealing doctrines in classic philosophy is how they understand friendship. And in Aristotle, in the Ethics, the phrase is, we used to know the Greek and keep it on our desk when we were graduate students together. Koine ta ton philon, the things of friends are in common.
Yeah.
That phrase occurs twice in Book 5 of the Republic. And what he's doing is he's collapsing all of the kinds of human association into this friendship, the highest form of which is pure devotion to the good and especially understanding the good. Aristotle says of marriage in the Ethics that the best marriages include that kind of friendship, he says. But that's not all of them, right? Because marriage has other purposes too. And it's a difference between the man and the woman that makes human beings possible, right? And so this difference of natures is, if you try to collapse that into a singularity of nature, then you have distorted nature. And as I say, unless you can see that that's radical. Like what's wrong with the sexual liberation movements today is they just take all that for granted, right? And that means they have wiped away the way human life actually works. If you step back and look at it from 30 feet, that's how it works.
You two are political philosophers, and you can argue all day long. The lawyer here said this was all a smokescreen. That he set up all this radical, erotic, potentially erotic festivals, all that, in order to quietly announce we possess nothing private but our bodies. In other words, communism. There is nothing more radical at the time of the founding. You know, if Thomas Jefferson, counterfactual, had said life, liberty, and property, as he ought to have said, instead he said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we'd be on a much firmer foundation if we had not had the Supreme Court effectively repeal the Fifth Amendment against taking. But Plato is here arguing for communism, Larry Arnn, isn't he? Isn't that more radical than sexual libertarianism or whatever that is that he's arguing for?
Communism, in actual practice in the world, communism, Marxism, put to work, it's always the enemy of the family. And it has to be, right? Because if, my children and grandchildren, there's some overlap here between me and Dan in those two categories. They're the most important beings on earth to me, right? And my wife together with me, right? And that means that somebody hurts them. I learned, because they live near, that Dan he's gone through that transition that we all go through when we first have children. You start imagining somebody hurting one of your children, and you start imagining yourself doing violent things.
Yes, indeed.
Yes,
because
very much
that is unthinkable, right? Can't be tolerated. The thought of it must be banished, right? Well, the point is, that's privacy, right? And communism is at war with that. And this city and speech is at war with that, right? And remember, in the grand scheme of things, Plato's Republic is a microcosm of the world. He's got these young men, they're all men. His argument here, by the way, is they didn't have to all be men, and I think he meant that. And they are adamant, right? They want to make him explain everything. Let's put it all together. Let's build a perfection here. And then we will know what to do, you see. And the dialogue reaches at the end of book one, it reaches an important stage with the banishment of Thrasymachus, who's just going to teach them to get whatever they want. And Socrates destroys him. And how does he do it? By teaching them it's a more interesting question, what ought you to want? What would be the right thing? What could you sacrifice for? What could you take real honor in achieving, right? And these young men now, they're not moderated yet. They're intensified. This is more powerful attraction than anything Thrasymachus could offer. Let's build something eternal and perfect, you see. And so now we're seeing what that takes. And it's crazy. And
it's up in the
powerful,
ante with every page, as Dr. O'Toole put me in an email prior to the program. It just ups the ante again and again and again. So that's why I was on the lookout for the communism. Nothing private except our bodies. That means
that's right.
Well, I don't know if you guys are
also not
not even
our bodies. Not our bodies.
Not even that. The hope is that we experience pleasure and pain in common with that of our fellow citizens. We should. Socrates gives this great image. Think about a finger. When your finger hurts, your whole body feels it. Well, the whole body politic should feel the pain of each individual citizen or the pleasure of each individual citizen equally. That is, we shouldn't really privilege our own bodies in particular. And what's the ultimate pain that we experience or that we fear, which is of course our own mortality. And so you could say, in a way, we're not supposed to privilege or care about our own mortality or that of our loved ones, our family, more than that of other citizens. That's the real radical thought. Marx famously promised, he says, when communism has reached its culmination, we'll live as species beings. The beings that you and I are now, of course, we care about our own mortality and that of our loved ones more than that of other people or other citizens. But Marx's hope is well, in the future, maybe we'll care about the well-being of the species equally. Our own mortality won't matter to us as long as the species as a whole lives on and thrives. So I think Plato's giving expression to that hope, that passion, that we can create something, as my father-in-law says, something truly beautiful and eternal and everlasting, to devote the normal passion that we have in the world, the love that we have in the world, toward a whole community, a whole supposedly a rational community, and not toward our own individual lives and those who are our own. Now, by the way, part of the argument.
When I read that, I thought the only thing that comes close to this is actually a monkish monastery of medieval times. And it's not much in common now. There are a few around the United States. There are a few cloisters of sisters still around. There are still a few monasteries of monks still around. But it didn't really take off, Dr. Arnn. But Marx got back to it. It really is kind of anticipating Marx by 2,400 years.
And distinguish something, right? I mean, a point that you make is that I, Larry Arnn, am neutral as the political, when I'm doing something for the college like this. But I will praise an ad. The most effective ad that I've seen is an ad where Kamala Harris it says, maybe it's true, I don't know. It says that there was a murderer and he was sentenced to prison, and that she arranged for him to have transgender surgery in prison. And she did it, she says, for the movement. Now, that's very effective. And
that's a verbatim. That's what she did. Yep. And I think it was in the 2012.
So maybe. But the point is, if that's true, she is doing what this says, right? And that's, wow. And the political philosopher Leo Strauss says once at the end of a beautiful essay that political philosophy is the highest form of the mating of courage and moderation. And Socrates in the Republic says, if we're going to go into all of this, we're going to have to be courageous. He calls for that, right? The moderation comes later, right? Because you wouldn't, Dan is going to tell us by the time we get to the end of this book, but I posit for now that the meaning of this book is that you wouldn't actually do this.
Well, that's why the ad that you referenced, where they take the actual tape of Vice President Harris saying, I am very proud of the fact that I provided for transgender surgery for every inmate to advance the movement. She did that during her campaign for Attorney General as Attorney General of California. The end of the ad is, I'm Donald Trump and I paid for this message. And that's because what she is saying is so jarring to the ordinary American, right? That her movement is completely other than the mainstream.
And remember, this is the same thing in Book 5 and later, too. And that means now we're going to actually do this. Right. And what limit is there on it? How far can it go? And the answer is all the way.
Pretty far. And we will continue to talk about how far Plato takes everyone in thinking about what the best regime would look like.
Hey, it's Scott Bertram, and I've got a challenge for you today. Become a better educated American citizen. And to help you do just that, we at Hillsdale College have our free online courses available for all who wish to learn. Our challenge? Take just one of our courses. There are so many to choose from. You can discover the beauty of the Bible in the Genesis story, study the writings of C.S. Lewis, or explore the true meaning of America in Constitution 101. We have dozens more to choose from, and all these self-paced free courses feature Hillsdale faculty and scholars, many you've heard on this podcast. So visit hillsdale.edu/course, COURSE, and pick one of the more than 30 free Hillsdale courses. I hope you'll accept my challenge. Pick whichever course you like and become a more educated citizen today. Go to hillsdale.edu/course, COURSE. That's hillsdale.edu/course.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The Hillsdale Dialogue is wrapping up for this weekend. One more segment ahead. All prior Hillsdale Dialogue, hundreds of them, are at hughforhillsdale.com. You can also go over to iTunes and find them in reverse order if you want to do it that way as well. Hillsdale Dialogue. All things Hillsdale, including Dr. Arnn's podcast, are at hillsdale.edu. The college application for next year is there, as are many video courses on the Constitution, on progressivism, on C.S. Lewis. They're all found over at hughforhillsdale.com or hillsdale.edu. I want to go and finish up our long conversation for this week. Let me make sure I close this hour with Dr. O'Toole. I want to ask you about the distinction between a man who opines and a man who knows. Very dangerous territory for a talk show host. There's a big difference between a man who opines and a man who knows. What is Socrates getting at here?
Well, it's at the very end of Book 5. He's brought in philosophy, and philosophy, of course, seeks genuine knowledge of things and doesn't seek merely to hold convictions because they're our own convictions or they're what we've been grown up with, or they're comforting or pleasing, right? He seeks to think things through to the bottom, entertain every radical possibility, and attain knowledge. Now, by the way, it may be the case that full or complete knowledge isn't available or possible for human beings. But, of course, you can have more reasonable opinions and less reasonable opinions. You can work through or discard those opinions which are contradictory or seem discordant with our actual experience of the nature of things. So philosophy is the process of pursuing and acquiring knowledge and dispensing with what we merely hold because we've believed it from birth or through education.
So my question is, I haven't known any ancient Greek for 50 years. Last time I took ancient Greek was when he says lovers of opinion and lovers of wisdom. Wisdom is the philosopher. Is a lover of opinion, would it translate as a traditionalist?
Well, it could potentially. Doxa, just those who, dogma is as our contemporary word.
Okay.
It's those who simply follow conventional belief. That is, the beliefs handed down to them. Yeah, sure, from traditional authorities, but you could just say from popular opinion, common opinion. The things that we normally believe, which could be true, but also are often shot through with falsehood. But if you seriously want to know, of course, you have to pierce through what has merely been handed down to you and try to really ground your ideas. And that often means purifying and rejecting conventional opinion.
I was just guessing that he was opposing those who, and I'm glad you came up with the word dogma, versus philosophy, because of course in the church they teach it's a depository of wisdom and you can't possibly get there. The church develops over 2,500 years. It has a dogmatic and a doctrine and a creed. It doesn't encourage people to go off and freelance. Yep. And I see Socrates
sure.
as saying we're going to leave it up to the philosophers. They're going to freelance their way and we're going to end up with communism and naked people running around.
Well, but see, that's sorry, I have to say something about that. Excuse me, Dan. Marx and Plato are not the same thing, right? Marx is not, in fact, a philosopher because philosophers love wisdom above all else, and Marx loves action, right? His philosophy culminates. It's very prescriptive, right? And it's a simplification of German historicist thought in one way. And it's a call not to understand, but to do, right? And that's, I can tell you in the education of the young, it's very important to keep alive all the time that it's more important to understand than to do. It's higher to understand than to do. And doing is necessary. And therefore, you should work really hard when you're in college to understand. And then later to keep that understanding alive while you do. So in other words, Plato's call is to read to the end of the flippin' book and see what all these problems are, right? And Marx's call is get on with it.
Let's get on with it. Yeah.
Well, we'll get on with it next week. Don't go anywhere, America. That brings us to the end of Book 5. We're going to do the Philosopher Kings at Book 6 next week, and we will get on with it because I want to come back to Marx and action versus thinking. Don't miss it. They're all collected at hughforhillsdale.com, everything at hillsdale.edu.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.